Hi, this is my Java program to calculate player damage per second in a game. The way it works is you pick what class you are. So let's say I'm melee, and then I deal 5 weapon damage, and I'm using a sword with ice enchantment, and I do 3 attacks per second. So then it outputs your total DPS is 22.5, and that's 15 slicing and 7.5 frost, and then prints out a chart showing the enemy damage resistance percents, and then how much I deal next to it if I deal damage for that type. So the way it works is it makes a new array list from this array list method down here, and for the damage type, so this is element 0 of the array, it's whatever damage types you want. I need to have the word enemy in the front, or like something to fill up the first word so that it can turn it into a 2D array right later. But then anyway, here's then every other element is like skeleton, and then it's damage resistance percents. And then for the last element in the array, it's the maximum damage you can deal per hit. This doesn't really do anything, I just needed some value for like the upper limit for my method later that verifies the user inputs, the valid one. So it makes the array list, then it copies the maximum damage from the last element in that array list to its own int, and then it removes that from the array list because that one was like shorter than all the other all the other elements had multiple words, so it just makes it easier to process the array. So then it turns that into a 2D string array with my game2array method, which is down here. It just splits the first element by however many words there are. So up here it's like what was it? So it's like enemy, slicing, stabbing. So like each one of these gets put into its own element in the array. And then so it does that, and it gets the length of that to know how long or like how big to make the 2D array. So then it just goes through each element in that and copies it over. And then we have where it sets the double array for player damage into the player damage method, wherever that was. Here it is. So then this just asks you, it's like what class you are. The program's really designed for option 4 for inputting your values manually. The rest of them work as it is, but if you tweak stuff, it make those not really be accurate anymore. So I mainly designed it around option 4. Then anyway, so then it passes int choices 4, because there are 4 options here, to my verify input method, and this just makes sure they enter a valid input that's like greater than 0 and less than choices. And this is what that damage, max damage int is for, is just to have an upper limit for this. So then it directs you, like if they pick choice 1, go to the melee method and so on. So then anyway, then you come down to melee, and this is where it asks you all the questions. It makes the player damage double array. Then they go through all of this, inputting whatever types they use, and then it like sets their damage based on that. And then here's the ranged one, and it's basically the same thing. And then the magic one, and it's more complicated, but pretty much the same thing. And then here's the manual one, where then it just like asks, it goes through like the first element of like the game data 2D array. It goes through like the first whatever column, like row of those to get each damage value. It asks enter damage per attack, and then it prints out each one, and then they enter whatever their value for it. So then we come back up to the main method, wherever it is. Okay, so then player damage, then it goes to attack speed, which then goes down to the attack speed method, where all it does is ask them how many attacks they do per second. That's really it. And then it goes back up and then makes a double 2D array for the DPS. And all it does is it goes through every single damage type for every enemy, like their resistances, and then it calculates, so like the player damage is their damage for that type, and then it gets, so like if their resistance is 60%, then they take 40% of the damage is what this part is, then it 0.01 to make it a percent, and then you multiply by attack speed, so that's their DPS for each type. And then under that at the main method, then it's the calculate pure DPS one, which is just like getting it unresisted by enemies. So that's just the full damage. And then, so here's where that was, double DPS array, double pure DPS. And then it converts all this into another 2D string array, just so it, to like help it print out nicer. So let me go down to the format array method, way down here. And this goes through each one, so like prints the first row, whatever, like the damage types it prints out, and then it goes through like prints out then the damage. If like the player deals damage of that type, then it adds on in the parentheses like how much damage you deal, but if they don't, then it just prints out the like game data, like whatever that element was for like the enemy damage resistance. And then for, oh yeah, and I made the format array one element longer in the like columns, I guess it'd be, because I wanted to print out like the total DPS at the end. So then it does that, it makes the first element of the first column at the end say total DPS, and then everyone under that, it's like the actual total DPS they deal for that enemy. So then it has that, then it goes to the longest word method, which is way down here, and gets the longest word in each like column, so then it knows how to space it out. So it'll scan through the first word and then set that like whatever to the longest word. It starts at 0, and then so it sets the first one to longest, and then if everyone after is longer, then it sets that just to space it out better. So then that's almost the end of the main method, longest word, and then all that's left is output, which is way down here. So then it outputs it, it says, it does a print line just to make a space from like what the inputs the user is entering. It says your total DPS is whatever the total DPS was, and then it goes through like every single damage type. So then it'll say you deal like however much of this type, however much for each one. It goes through, and then it adds a couple more spaces, and then here's where like kind of the chart prints out. It says percent equals enemy resistance percent for that damage type. The number in parentheses is your DPS for that type. If 0, nothing is shown, and then this just goes through and prints out the format array. And then this is where it gets the longest word to know how to space it out for each like column. So then I'll just show you that again. So like if I input values manually, then you just enter each one. So I wanted to space it out right. It took a few different tries trying to get it to display properly, but I think I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. But one thing I wanted with this program is to make it where it was more flexible. So like you see here, it's like whatever how the chart is, but then if I scroll back up to the top, it's like you can easily edit it. So everything that the user should want to edit should be right here, and then the manual mode should keep working. So like for example, if I want to add more enemies, I'll just like copy and paste these. Then if I run the program again, it can display however many there are, and then like if you want to add damage types or whatever, I'll just copy this so I can paste it to all of them. Then run it again. Now it'll ask you like whatever other types I put. So I put 1, 2, 3, 4. So now it's asking me 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it can output the chart still with all these extras. So I just wanted it to be more flexible in case I make it work with a different game later on. I won't have to change as much in the program. So like I said before, that kind of makes it where the melee and range and magic methods don't work, since those questions are pretty specific for how this is set up now. But manual, whatever mode, should still work. But anyway, so here's my program.